Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the ELLC monthly roundup, which is now actually the monthly round table because we adapted the structure a little bit, and it's been a while since I facilitated one of this actually, but I'm super excited to facilitate this one where we're talking about or focusing on conflict and how to engage with conflict from, I guess, a perspective that is more biblical, more holistic. Um, it's been a month where, as usual, we've had the Discussion Lounge and we've had articles, and we're actually quite blessed today to have Sue, who is one of the writers or contributors on this month's content with us. But we also had short talks from Johnny, and I forget the other person's name actually. But there are tons of resources around conflict for the month, for this month's topic. My name is Debbie, for those of you who have forgotten or don't know me. I am based in Switzerland, and I am joined by Rosana Liste, who is originally from Argentina, currently lives in London, leading the YWAM community at Urban Key. And so really excited to have her here and to hear some of her thoughts and her process on the topic. So welcome, Rosana.
Thank you.
And we also have Scott, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name because I don't want to butcher it. So he will let us know that himself. But Scott is originally from California, currently based in Rostrevor, Northern Ireland, and leads the community there. So very excited to have you on, Scott. And
Yeah.
maybe you can help us pronounce your
Yeah.
surname.
Sotomayor, but also our town name is also hard to pronounce. It's Rostrevor. It's also tough. So it's a double issue here.
Yes, I see. Yeah, lots of things to learn. But thanks for pronouncing those correctly for us. But welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
And we also have Sue Pratt, who is from England and connected to the community in Harpenden, and is actually a trained conflict person, mediator, coach, something like that. She'll tell us more about it. But she wrote one of the articles, like I mentioned, on this month's content. So very excited to have you here, Sue, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's dive in. I think, of course, conflict is a part of life. Like, it's not something that happens sometimes to some people and not. But it's also, I think, one of the most misunderstood or sort of complex topics to navigate just in general. Uh, I think what a good way to start is just to hear a little bit from you guys, like what stood out to you first from the resources that we have seen put out on this topic this month, and then we can navigate our way from there. So I'll begin with you, Rosanna, if you would share some of your thoughts on the topic.
Yes, as you said, this is a complex topic and it's an endless topic because we never finish learning about this, how to build unity and how to deal with conflicts in a healthy way. Then always learners in this topic. But something that really liked me from Sue in her report was that he started with a very honest declaration. He said, a team is a good idea from God, but sometimes doesn't work. And I think that when I read that, I thought, oh, it's nice, because sometimes we, in our perfectionist kind of ideal world, Christian world, we feel that, okay, we should have answers for everything, and really we don't. Then that was a good beginning for me to read that. And also, I think that coming from another culture, I'm living in England for the last 21 years, but still, thinking about how we deal with things very differently between different countries. And we are a global and we are a multi-generational kind of mission. Then we have so many diversity, which is a richness, but also is quite complex to deal with that diversity. For example, in my culture, discussions, openness, also conflicts have some attraction for us. We have, as Latinos, a bit Italian in our way of expressing ourselves. We like to connect deeply, and we don't have problems thinking differently. Actually, that is for us is something that enriches us. But coming here, I noticed that is not like that. That sometimes people are afraid about conflict, are afraid about offending others. Actually, this generation is quite, sensitive to get offended by things. Then I noticed that I was learning how to deal then with conflict in a way that was more sensitive according to the culture. And I think that we never finish because we are so many cultures living together. In my house, we have more than around 20 different nations living together. And it's a learning process every day.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you brought up with the multicultural or intercultural perspective on conflict, because it is true that depending on what culture you come from, whether it's family culture or just your citizenship or your nationality, you will approach it differently. And I think what Johnny said he spoke about this difference between peace, as in the word peace in English, and shalom, like from the Hebrew. And I think that speaks to that, because instead of adapting and bending yourself over toward one culture or the other, it's like, how do we find shalom as we interact with one another and with different or diversity of circumstances? So I really love that. I think that that's a great perspective to remember and say, okay, are we adapting too much or overly, or are we seeking to sort of have everything settled, or are we seeking for shalom, which is more wholeness and health and navigate intention? Yeah, but that's really great. Scott, you mentioned something about offense, which I thought was really interesting. A bit more into that would be great.
Yeah, actually, the multicultural side of things actually, it relates to what I just on the topic of offense, like thinking about, this is a leaders learning community. When we have power and when there's conflict, there's a whole other discussion. I found even in my community. I do need to I need to expand the way I do conflict, depending on the type of ethnic background person I'm speaking with. It does require me to not just go, well, this is my culture and I'm going to kind of do it my way, but actually need to learn, well, how does a different, like we have an Indian family with us. Well, how would they deal with conflict? Vastly different from me. And the more I can kind of expand the way I do things without losing the truth of who I am and what I am, and further maybe what is true, I think that is to serve them and to smooth the issue of the potential challenges that we can face. Also, I would add that, one of Rosana and I's mutual friends, who's now pioneering in Cardiff, a big mentor for me in my kind of leadership upbringing, Lydia Lamardo. I had to learn to not turn off when she was overzealous in her communication, and maybe Rosana, you can call it Latina in her communication. I had to learn to realize that just because she's big emotions, big words, it doesn't mean she's not right. And that was something from my cultural background that I had to kind of unlearn and expand upon through through conflict. And so when talking about offense, that's one aspect of conflict. It's not the whole story of conflict. It's definitely it's the scariest maybe when we're personally offended to deal with. When someone's offended by what we've done, it's the scariest sometimes to deal with. But I've also found that conflict can be simply the way this is going, I disagree with, or I need to stand and kind of shape it in a different direction. Or else I'm being, or else I'm being in some ways um, incongruent with my own values. So that's not about offense. I've not been offended to my personal level, but actually I do have an issue with our directions are different, and we need to maybe realize how to be in step with each other, and that's conflict, and that's transformative and challenging nonetheless, but not necessarily always rooted in personal offense.
Yeah, yeah. No, I echo that. I totally see what you're saying, and I think because when we began, we are saying conflict is permeates all of life, but sometimes it's not a one-on-one human conflict. It's a conflict
Right.
of ideas, perhaps, or conflict of approach in life. But that's really rich. As you were saying that, I remember something that is it Keith Warrington, if I pronounce his
Mm.
name correctly. He talked about relationships during the lounge conversation.
Mm.
And that really stuck with me because it's like if we keep health trying to nurture healthy relationships with one another as sort of the end goal of conflict, that really helps us to sort of take away this offense. Am I doing this because I am offended, or am I doing this because I want to maybe nurture a relationship to grow and to bloom
Mm.
more? I thought that was a really good perspective to have to think about um, in terms of people, but also in terms of ideas and like situations. Like, what is the ultimate goal here, and why am I engaging in this or not engaging in this conflict?
Mm.
But great thoughts. Sue, would you share a little bit of what stood out to you?
Yes, I think continuing on from what Scott said, I noticed too that Alice, in her talk from Norway, she talked about different sorts of conflict. And so you can have a disagreement over an issue or a policy or a vision or a project or something like that, and it doesn't necessarily affect your relationship. Especially if you know each other well, people that know each other well can often have quite public disagreements, and it's fine because there's a lot of trust between each other, and you understand one another, and you know how far you can go in disagreeing. But when the relationship's affected, and the conflict becomes more personal, then there's a lot more trouble there. And of course, we are a mission. We're youth with a mission. We're relationship oriented, aren't we? We do things through relationship, and that's a blessing, but it can be difficult as well. So that whole thing of really listening, and I noticed that all for the two talks and the articles talked about listening, and really listening, and not just listening, surface listening, but really hearing one another and spending time to hear one another. And sometimes that can diffuse, I think, a sense of offense. Yes, being offended sometimes, as Scott says, can almost mask the reality or the sense of justice about an issue that really does need to be talked about, because sometimes those disagreements are about a sense of injustice, but also there is that thing of, am I going to be easily offended? And some of that's about personality. I mean, I think I'm somebody that probably takes things more personally than other people, maybe because I'm a feeler. Sometimes people who are more thinkers, they don't necessarily notice emotion and how other people are feeling. Maybe I notice it too much and make my own interpretations about what I think the other person's thinking. So you've got all that layers of personality coming in as well.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something there about listening. One of the things Matt Rollins has said before is when you're speaking to someone, you should ask yourself, am I listening to respond or am I listening to understand? And I think that that makes a huge difference, sort of that switch in mindset. Because only when we listen do we understand where people are coming from, whether it's from a personality angle or whether it's from a cultural angle. And listening allows us to engage in this real interaction or conversation. So yeah, that's definitely a great aspect to pay attention to. I also think like because listening is a skill, like we teach or I teach my students listening. And if you're into counseling or communication, you probably know this. But it's like everyone can learn this. I love that about listening. It's not a blessing that some people have and others don't. It's everybody has the ability and the opportunity to grow in this area. But thank you for bringing that back to our minds and highlighting that, Sue. I wanted to ask, because I mean, the topic says maintaining unity by walking through conflict. And I think what that tells us is that there's something, there's disunity that is a possibility if you don't walk through conflict, right? And in our YWAM, at least in Europe, I've been hearing, or we've been having these conversations around unity as well. Like, how do we stay in one spirit, or how do we stay unified in our purpose and moving forward? What are some of the, well, first of all, how does that resonate with you guys in terms of what is the connection between unity and conflict? And what are some of your personal experiences, if you've had any, in that area?
I think that if we learn how to deal with conflict, conflict can be very positive and take us to build unity. I know, because we go deep in knowing each other, knowing what bothers the other person, knowing how the other person receives the what you say, and also help to know yourself too. A little bit more. What do you want really? What do you need? Then dealing with this conflict, if we deal in a positive way, can be very helpful to create even a deeper unity. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think of the question: is unity the goal? Is unity the goal of what we're here for? And ultimately, I mean, this is just off the seat of my pants thought. I don't think unity should be the goal. Unity is what kind of brings about the power for accomplishing our goals. Unity is essential for our witness. Who are we if we are divided against, going back to what Jesus said, a house divided against itself will fall. Well, it's not simply just for the sake of unity, but because we've a calling and a purpose and something to build in the kingdom. And so when we have disunity, that is obstructionist. It's obstructing our ability to love our neighbor, love our enemy, to bring about the change that God wants to see on earth through us. So yeah, unity is essential, but it's essential to our witness. It's essential to our humanizing of the other. It's essential to our character. It's essential to what seeds we're planting and what we're doing.
It's sort of like oil, isn't it?
Again?
Sorry, carry on, Debbie.
That's a good one.
No, you carry on, Sue. I want to hear what you said.
Well, I mean, it's just we're batting off each other, aren't we? I think, which is great. It's like oil, isn't it, in a car? So a car's not going to run without engine oil. So it's the thing that holds us together. And actually, if you look at it biblically, we start off with unity anyway, because we start off at the cross, and the resurrection. So we start off at the same place. So we don't start off really leaders, followers, titles. We start off at the cross, and we're all there on our knees at the cross before Jesus. And therefore we are united already because of what he's done for us. So I agree with Scott in the sense of, we don't want to sit, aren't we loving one another, sitting around drinking coffee, but we're not actually doing anything. So I think it's about having a performing team, a team that performs in a healthy sense. And I think that the link between unity and conflict is about growth and the willingness of people to go through discomfort, because conflict can be uncomfortable. So to be willing to have the uncomfortable conversations or the sense of messiness at times in order to grow into greater unity and greater understanding, which is, and the humility that Rosana was talking about, really. And I think that takes a humble leader, to apologize and say, well, I'm sorry, team, I messed up. Please help me. Can you help me do that one better?
Yeah. I'm thinking even like, as a team leader, I want conflict, genuinely want it. Not because I like it, but it means that the team members I'm with are speaking their mind. It means that they're developing in a way that they're individuals. They are different to me. If I have uniformity in my team, they're just my minions, and we can't get anywhere while if I replicate a bunch of Scots in my base or in my teams. So actually, I want conflict. I want them to push me and to challenge me, because I'm human. Of course, I don't have it all. So in reality, are we raising up? I'm trying to calm down now. We could raise up a bunch of butt kissers in YWAM who simply just agree with me, agree with Scott. And instead, should we not be raising up people who are different to us, who will challenge us to move us further, to expand the vision, to expand our diversity and what goes into. So I don't necessarily want to fight all the time, but if I'm looking simply to have peace, and not shalom, which is a part of, actually, the wheel needs to do its role and it's pushing the car forward. I think that's the thing I'm feeling is I actually want my team to push back against me. I want conflict. It makes us stronger.
Yeah, we used to speak a lot about I invented a new concept about conversations between people. We used to speak about dialogue, and I used to teach about trialogue. That means that invite always God in the conversation. No, that is so good in all kind of relationship, even with your husband or wife or your friends or your team workers or whoever. Always not to just have a conscience that we are two in that conversation, but to invite the third one, that is God, in that conversation. Because honestly, in regard with conflict or differences between us, unless that the Holy Spirit intervene, sometimes it's not possible, humanly speaking, to sort situations. Sometimes, for me, for example, one of the big topics is forgiveness, and we talk a lot about that. But honestly, humanly speaking, the tendency of our flesh is going through revenge or our self-righteousness, or affirm that I'm right in my arguments. All my flesh go in that direction, and just to forgive and to listen the other person and to surrender my own arguments. If it's not by the Holy Spirit, I consider, after my experience with all my human efforts, never is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of richness there. Something about unity, I think, because I wanted to come back to what Scott raised up as well, is perhaps what we mean when we use that word. I think that that would be interesting maybe to unpack at some point. Because do we mean uniformity? Do we mean sameness? Or do we really look at unity from the biblical perspective, which is the what is it? The analogy of the body, right? The body is unified. It's one body, different parts. There's nothing that calls us to be what do you say, like minions of Scott, if I use your word. So I think that there's a deep richness there to say, okay, when we say unity and we use that word, what comes to our minds? Like what meaning do we ascribe to it? Because I totally agree. I don't think that what we're trying to do is to say, come and think the way I do and live the way I do and approach life the way I do. I think it's more come with our uniqueness, which produces diversity, but does that diversity come together in the sense of how does one body that is different and diverse in its parts and functions work as one body? And there's a lot of that's dynamic. There's a lot of life there, but again, like brings a lot of conflict, I think, because you're like my nails are not my legs, right? So how do they coexist? Or the sort of famous teeth and tongue coexisting in the same space. So I think that that's worth thinking about. Like what do we think about unity, and when we say that, are we trying to just reproduce ourselves and our approach and our styles, or are we intentionally making space for the uniqueness of each individual that joins our teams, our communities to thrive and have space to breathe and come alive, but the tension that brings, the difference that brings doesn't shake things up and destroys it, but instead it brings more life. So that's how I sort of think about unity, but I think that might help us a lot to sort of just reflect if we're coming from the same perspective, because again, we're a diverse group and we come from many, many different places. But that's really cool. I think I wanted to ask, like, what are some recent lessons or experiences that you've had where you could pull like a value or principle? You're like, hey, this is how in my leadership or in my interaction with my community, with my team, I have approached it this way, and it's been really meaningful and sort of alive in this moment. Rosana, you kind of spoke about that, of course, in terms of inviting the Holy Spirit, which I actually think we should all start from there and not like, do our thing and then bring him in. But I think that that's a really, really solid principle to remember. Like you start with God and go through it with him and end with him, right? Or wrap up with him. But I was curious in your own personal context, what are some of the things that you would say?
I would like to start, if it's possible, some personal experience. Some months ago, I went through some circumstances of injustice. And, when we need to deal with injustice and we feel rejected, all the personal feelings and things that we need to deal with, I noticed that some people has been trying to be neutral. This word neutral really made me feel a bit uncomfortable. I don't know exactly if it's because it's an influence from humanism or what is or maybe something cultural. But I was asking God after that and see how other sisters and brothers were dealing with the situation that for me was very unfair. They tried to be very objective, because here objectivity is a big value, to be neutral in dealing with some differences or situations. To be neutral is like is good. But for me, I went to the Lord, maybe from the way that I process things. I'm a feeling orientated person in personality, but also coming from a Latino background. for me, sometimes neutrality and objectivity can go against empathy. When I am under some situations like this that are difficult, I don't need someone that can in a neutral attitude, objective, distant a bit from how I feel or how I perceive the situation. I need someone that identify with me, that empathize with me. But the fact that we want to be that objective, sometimes we lost that objectivity. Trying to put that objectivity in the place of God sometimes make us lose that neutrality or that objectivity. And I ask God, are you subjective or objective or just objective when you need to deal with things in our life? I was asking God. I'm a philosopher in a way. I studied philosophy. I need to have all these answers in advance. And I was dealing with that, and God responded me so incredible. He is so incredible with me. And he's so objective and so subjective. That's why Jesus could, deal with all the situation from heaven, but he identified with us to the point that to put limit to himself and become a human being. I said to people that for me, correctness could be against love sometimes. I can be very correct and not be loving, That's why I sometimes, instead of looking for being completely correct and objective and neutral, I need to develop more this capacity to empathize with people and their circumstances.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you, Rosana. Cool. Pleasure. Well, do we want to do one more? Because we are running out of time, but I think we have one more. Scott, Sue, do you guys have like a short something to say in like a minute or two?
Yep, I can go. I think what Rosana's saying is great. Just that objectivity. Of course, when you're mediating between two people in conflict, there is a need for the mediator not to take sides, because I would be coming in from the outside, and so it would be important from a sense of justice that both people in conflict can trust me, that I'm going to come in and listen to both sides and hopefully be empathetic with both sides. Sometimes that's easier than others. And of course, there are some situations you can't mediate, because there are some situations of injustice that it's not a simple conflict situation. It could be a clear example of abuse or something like that. And there are certain things, even when I was training in conflict mediation, that I would know that there were certain things that I would not be able to mediate. For example, anything criminal activity or abuse activity. So but that need for empathy, and I think the thing I've learned, principles that I've learned, is to do with growth, and that growth takes time, and that actually being in conflict with people, I've been able to grow in my sense of self-awareness, and awareness of other people around me. So emotional intelligence, my self-awareness, but awareness of other people, the needs of the group, and the wider picture, so that I see conflict not as a threat, but as something that I can grow in over time. And just because I'm a conflict mediator doesn't mean to say that I'm perfect in conflict, because I've had one friend say to me, Sue, how is it that you do conflict mediation, and yet you can't cope with the conflict that you and I are just having right now, and you're getting angry? And I'm going, thank you very much. Yes, a little bit of self-awareness there. So I'm not, I might preach conflict resolution, but you know what? I'm not perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not perfect yet, and I still have a lot to learn. And you know, even on a daily basis with my friends and family and loved ones and people who are near to me, quite
Right.
apart from work situations. So I think, you know, be kind to each other, be kind to yourself in the good 21st century buzzword, and and we'll, you know, be willing to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thank you so much. I think that we could have another hour of discussion and it will still be rich. And but I think we will wrap up here. I want to say a special thank you to all of you. I think you brought perspectives that have even made me think like, oh, that's interesting to think about. Like conflict is not just about offense. And I'm like, of course, that is exactly right. But I think we don't articulate that sometimes. And so we don't see it clearly. But I think you guys brought a lot of wisdom and perspective into it. And I know that that would bless the people that listen to it. We're just going to wrap up here. And if you haven't listened to the other resources that we've been referring to over the course of this conversation, we highly recommend that you go do that because there's a lot of richness in those as well. But we will say goodbye here. And hopefully I get the opportunity to chat with you guys again in the future.
In person,
yeah,
Debbie, in person.
Bye-bye. Exactly. That would be way better than Zoom. But thanks again and see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Bye. Bye, Scott. Bye, Rosanna.